This is part 2 of helping you with your compulsive eating. And in order to do that, we'll use the 3-minute exercise. The purpose of the 3-minute exercise is to help you identify the problem, the situation, what your problem behavior and what you're telling yourself, and then give you a way to change all that. Now, if you look at the form, you'll see down the left-hand side is A, B, C, D, E, and F. And normally we start with C. C stands for undesirable behavioral consequence, and in this case, it's compulsive eating. So at C, you would write compulsive eating. Now we go back to A. A is the situation you were in right before you compulsively ate, and we'll assume you wake up in the middle of the night and you have the urge to eat. So at A, write, I have the urge to eat. So at A, you have the urge to eat, and then at C, you compulsively ate. However, it's never A that causes C. It's never a situation, external or even internal, like an urge or a craving, that forces you to do anything at C, but rather B leads to your compulsive eating at C. And B is your belief, specifically your irrational belief, your demand, your absolute, the must, should, supposed to, have to, in your head, that causes your compulsive eating at C. So it often is something like, I must satisfy my urge to eat right now. So write that, or if you have a better idea of what your B is, write that. I must satisfy my urge to eat right now. Now, if you look at what you wrote at B, although we're calling that an irrational belief, actually it's very rational, it's very reasonable as a goal, a value, or a preference. So if you just told yourself, I strongly prefer to satisfy my urge, I passionately desire to satisfy my urge, then that would make sense, because when we have urges, when we have cravings, we want to satisfy it. That's human, and that's all well and good. But then, if you just stuck with a preference, then you could weigh your greater preference not to gain weight against your lesser preference to satisfy your urge, and clearly the greater preference, since it's a greater preference, would win out, and you would choose not to eat. But when you escalate your lesser preference into a demand, I absolutely must satisfy my urge, then that outweighs any other preferences, no matter how strong, because a must has infinite weight. On a scale from 0 to 100, your must has a weight of 1,000 or 10,000 or even more. So that's why you compulsively ate. So in order to highlight that, underline the must, to highlight that it's the must that's the problem, it's the must that's toxic, it's the must that causes your compulsive eating, not your goal to satisfy your urge. This leads to the question, how do you keep your preferences to satisfy your urges? You wouldn't want to abolish those preferences, then you wouldn't do anything. But not make it into a must, so you can reasonably weigh stronger versus weaker preferences. And the answer is go on to D. D stands for disputing or questioning the irrational belief at B. And that's a simple process. You just take what you wrote at B and put why or what is the evidence in front of it, and you get a good question. Why must I satisfy my urge to eat? Or what is the evidence? I absolutely must satisfy my urge to eat right now. So write that question at D. Now we go on to E. E stands for effective new thinking, or the answer to the question. And if you really think about it and search for evidence for the must, you won't find any, because a must in this psychopathological case, it's psychopathological in the sense that it leads to self-defeating behaviors, there are no musts of this sort at all. There's no evidence for them. There's no logic behind them. And it's just impractical to escalate your preferences into musts because that leads to bad results. There's only one way that could be musts, and that is if you controlled the universe and everything in it, then anything you decreed must be would be. But as far as I know, according to this morning's Wall Street Journal, you haven't been elected ruler of the universe. So you can write that at E to answer the question, what's the evidence I absolutely must satisfy my urge right now? There is no evidence, there is no law saying that because I prefer to satisfy my urge, I absolutely must. And then the reason why there are about 10 or 12 lines at E is because the more you write at E about why the must is false, the more meaningful it tends to be, as long as what you write is meaningful. So I'll suggest a few more statements at E, and if they're meaningful, include them. If they're not, don't, and then come up with some of your own. So some other possibilities are, although it's uncomfortable not to eat right now, it's not the end of the universe. I've survived urges to eat before and not indulged, and I'll survive them in the future. I don't like having this frustration of not eating when I have the urge, but I definitely can stand, I can bear, I can face living with this urge. These urges wax and wane, and this will pass. The more I give in to the urge, the harder it will be not to indulge in the future. Whereas the more I refuse to give in to the urge, I'll reinforce that behavior, and the easier it will become in the future. And then you can remind yourself of the BC connection. It's not my urge or craving to eat that forces me to compulsively indulge, but rather it's my unrealistic thinking, my irrational demand about it, and with practice, I can change my thinking. I can still live a happy life if I don't give in to my urges to eat, and in fact, I'll be happier in the long run if I don't. So those are some possibilities at E, and then once you internalize what you wrote at E, and we'll discuss shortly how you can do that, then that will lead to F, a new behavior, which would be controlled eating rather than compulsive eating. Now the question is, how can you internalize what you wrote at E? How can you get from level 1, making it a superficial recognition, to level 2, making it a deep conviction, deeply feeling it and believing it and acting on it, acting on the idea that there are no musts and shoulds. You're not compulsively forced to eat when you have the urge, and develop a new philosophy, a new must-free philosophy, so you're in control of your eating rather than feeling like the urge is in control. And the answer is by using the same learning process we use to learn most things, which says that reinforcement is the royal road to learning. The more you practice, reinforce, repeat, review, go over this thinking again and again and again, in and out of the tempting situations, the sooner you'll internalize it, the sooner you'll build new pathways in your brain to think like a non-addicted person rather than think like an addicted person. Now, don't take my word for it. Go practice, be a scientist, experiment, write out a 3-minute exercise like this at least once a day. 2 or 3 times would be even better. Write it out, think it through, make sure you're connecting with what you write, and then I'll give you a money-back guarantee that at the end of a few weeks, your thinking will start to change, and at the end of a month, you'll be doing much better in terms of your compulsive eating. And if you have any questions, you can call me or email me through my website, 3minutetherapy.com. 3 is spelled out.